Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, gunshots ring out across Juba Wednesday night. The South Sudanese military says that several soldiers were killed in earlier gunfights at an army barracks. Also, in Paris, the trial of Pascal Simbikangwa continues. The Rwandan ex-spy chief is charged with complicity in the 1994 genocide in his homeland. Today's testimony leaves defence lawyers unhappy with the conditions under which they have to question witnesses. And we hear from Congolese musician So Kalmari in Paris ahead of a concert to be held here in support of the victims of the conflict in Central African Republic. First up, gunshots continue to sound out across Juba Wednesday night. Earlier, people were once again sent running for cover after gunfights broke out at an army barracks. The South Sudanese military says that at least 5 soldiers were killed in fighting that broke out over a dispute over back pay. It happened at the same army headquarters where clashes last December sparked the conflict in which thousands have been killed. Both the army and rebels backing former Vice President Riek Machar accuse each other of breaking a ceasefire as peace talks have stalled. Well, France 24's regional correspondent Duncan Woodside joins us more. He tells us about the government's theory that today's violence was unconnected to the wider conflict.
That's obviously one theory initially being put forward, that this was purely a dispute over pay, that soldiers in the base were unhappy because they hadn't received their back pay, and the army was saying initially that 5 people died as a result of those clashes. But subsequently, the army appears to have acknowledged that the soldiers who didn't receive their pay or were disputing the pay situation were under the command of Gatwech Guy. Now, this is significant because Gatwech Guy is one of the few NUR officers, or one of the few senior NUR officers left within the army, which is or who is loyal to the regime. And the regime, of course, is run by Salva Kiir. That's President Salva Kiir, and he's a Dinka. Now, the situation in South Sudan has largely been one where Dinka forces have been pitched against renegade NUR elements during this crisis. And so the fact that elements loyal to Guy appear to have been unpaid could represent a further ratcheting up of ethnic tensions on the military side.
Now, Duncan, has there been any other signs of flare-ups elsewhere in the country today?
Well, the situation in Malakal appears to have changed once again. Now, Malakal is a key city because it's the capital of oil-rich Upper Nile states, and the status of that town in terms of who it's held by has changed several times since the beginning of the conflict, with the rebels coming in, and then the government pushing them out, and the rebels coming back in again. Now, it appears this afternoon, according to sources on the ground there, that the rebels have now withdrawn from the city, and there is a power vacuum within the city, effectively no military elements there at the moment. Now, that may indicate that the rebels are consolidating and moving forwards to the northwest to try and capture the oil fields.
The judge in the murder trial of Oscar Pistorius today heard that a month before shooting his girlfriend dead, the South African Olympian accidentally fired a gun in public. Witness Kevin Lerena testified that the weapon went off under a restaurant table in Johannesburg. Pistorius convinced a friend to take the blame because he was afraid his involvement would draw too much media attention. Pistorius has pled not guilty to the murder of Riva Steenkamp last Valentine's Day. He claims to have mistaken her for an intruder when he opened fire. Here in Paris, the trial of Pascal Simbikangwa is well into its 5th week. The Rwandan ex-spy chief is charged with complicity in the 1994 genocide in his homeland. Our Nicolas Romain was in court for the testimony of a witness who says he lived in Simbikangwa's house for several weeks during the mass slaughter of Tutsis and moderate Hutus.
This Wednesday, we heard a witness who was a 65-year-old businessman in Kigali, a Tutsi. He said that at the time of the genocide, he spent several weeks in Pascal Simbikangwa's house, and he says that at the time he saw men coming to Simbikangwa's house to collect weapons. The difficulty with this witness was the fact that he was in Kigali via video conference with an interpreter, and this made the questioning quite complicated, and this is something which the defense lawyers regretted strongly.
It was very complicated. It's not normal. We can't ask questions the way we want to. This trial, it's basically a succession of witnesses. We face these problems frequently, and the witnesses are very unclear.
We are now in week 5 of this trial, which should last 6 weeks, and we asked one of the main plaintiffs, Alain Gauthier, how he thought this trial had gone so far. It's, of course, an historic trial here because it's the first time in France that a Rwandan is tried for complicity of genocide.
With this kind of trial, you are never sure of winning. I hope the jury will realize that Pascal Simbikongwa's defense doesn't make sense. He just denies everything and says the witnesses' testimonies are fabricated.
The main difficulty with this case, we saw it again this Wednesday, is the fact that the genocide took place 20 years ago, and therefore many of the witnesses have a lot of trouble in remembering exactly what they saw and what they heard during the genocide. The court here will now give its verdict on March the 14th.
In Egypt, the terror trial of several journalists has been adjourned until March 24th after one defendant appeared in court with his arm in a sling and claiming to have been injured during his arrest. Mohamed Fahmy, the Egypt bureau chief of international news organization Al Jazeera, asked the court to release him for treatment for his injury. Now, he and 2 colleagues are on trial, along with 17 other defendants, on charges accusing them of aiding a terrorist group and endangering national security. Authorities accuse Al Jazeera of working for ousted Islamist President Mohamed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. All those charged have pled not guilty. Staying in Egypt, the findings of the first official investigation into the fatal crackdown on a sit-in in support of Mohamed Morsi says that security forces used excessive gunfire and didn't give peaceful demonstrators enough time to leave. However, Egypt's Human Rights Council accuses gunmen inside the protest camp at the Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque of escalating the violence by shooting at police. 624 civilians and 8 officers were killed in the clashes last August, making it one of the bloodiest days in the country's modern history. Well, this week, Italy's new Prime Minister vowed to work more closely with North African nations in efforts to tackle the growing flood of illegal immigration from Africa to Europe. Matteo Renzi headed to Tunisia, saying that he chose the nation for his first overseas visit since taking office last week because Mediterranean nations have a key role to play in Europe. Italy is struggling to deal with the repercussions of being a favourite entry point for illegal migrants from Africa. Campaigners are pushing for Rome to do more for those who make it across.
Roma Termini, the central train station. It has become home to a great number of African migrants in Rome. And not far away, Gaoussou Ouattara from Côte d'Ivoire and his associates have established the main office of their association. The Movement for Africans has offered full backing to the new battle of Cécile Kyenge. This country is intolerant. We must organize to fight that. If not, we are lost. This Italian deputy of Congolese origin has been back in the National Assembly for only 10 days, after an absence of 10 months. She had occupied a government post, that of Minister of Integration. Now she has become the leader of the fight to deal with the flow of Africans into Italy.
Every person who arrives has the right to be treated like a human being. So we must find what capacity the person has.
This is St. Peter's Square in Rome. Caramba hustles for a tourism agency, getting 2 or 3 euros for every group of tourists he brings in. He is hoping that the mission of Cécile Kyenge will lower hiring discrimination.
In Italy, in this country, they don't have no possibility with no black people. In the restaurant, when you go there, you see the Bangladesh people, Indian people, but it's not the black people.
It is tough to determine how many Africans live in Italy today. Cécile Kyenge says a real immigration policy should be based on finding out how many foreigners already live in Italy.
Well, that pretty much wraps things up for me for today. But before handing you back for more news and headlines from around the world, we'll hear from Congolese musician So Kalmanri. He's come in to speak to France 24 ahead of next Monday's fundraiser being held here in Paris in support of victims of Central African Republic's crisis.
I know all what you can see in Central Africa today. I've been going through this because I was young. I lost my father, and there's too much things happening. So it's just why I'm afraid because there's something is missing because there's no leaders in Africa that can bring people together and understand where they're going.
Captain, Captain, Captain.